Hello, good day to everyone. We are joining in from different parts of the world, so it is different times. So, whatever time zone you are, that greeting to you on behalf of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. We welcome all of you on a very important things that we are celebrating. Is the 60th anniversary of the Tricontinental Conference that happened in Havana, Cuba in 1966. This year also happens to be the 10th year since the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research started to work with movements, developing research in the battle of ideas, writing, producing material. So this is a decade in the battle of ideas for Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. We are happy that all of you could join and listen to us on this very important document that we produced as part of our 100th dossier. See, that's another milestone, the future. Welcome to this webinar, The Future, We Build It Now. On behalf of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, I welcome our keynote speaker, Comrade Kwesi Pratt Jr. He is the General Secretary of the Socialist Movement of Ghana. He is a writer and a journalist. I welcome my colleagues, Comrade Vijay Prashad, the director, Tings and Atul, co-coordinators from Asia office, Laura and Carlos from Nuestra America office as co-coordinators, Mika and Tariro as co-coordinators. Mika is here representing the Pan-African office. We have Franziska, who is joining us from Europe to represent the Zetkin Forum. And we have Comrade Ghassane, who is part of our Tricontinental's Maghreb region. He is the coordinator there. We also have Amilcar, who is making this possible from the tech department. We have Nathalie and Julia, who are there to interpret for the language into Spanish and vice versa. And one important thing before I give the meeting to Vijay to chair, and that there is an interpretation button, and please use that and choose the language that you are comfortable, either English or Spanish. So welcome all on behalf again of Tricontinental. Vijay, please take over and please lay the foundation for what Comrade Kwesi and others will be speaking on this important occasion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ambi. Thanks very much. Ambedkar is the person in charge of communications, and this webinar was not only his idea, but he organized it. So thanks for doing that with our very, very hardworking team. What we're going to do is first, I'm going to make very few comments because I'm eager to hear what our dear comrade Kwesi Pratt Jr. is going to say. But just very briefly, this is the 60th anniversary of the Tricontinental Conference, which itself built upon the Bandung Conference of 1955, where 29 African and Asian nations came to Indonesia in the midst of the decolonization process to put on the table the importance of the ideas of sovereignty for these new states, and for the dignity of all peoples, not only in these states, but across the world. They stood for peace against the bloc mentality that was leading the world back to war, and they stood for development. In other words, for the emancipation of people from suffering of the most basic kinds, suffering from illiteracy, suffering from lack of housing, suffering from hunger, suffering from a lack of medicine, and so on. That fight for emancipation was central to the Bandung dynamic. It was a gathering of 29 heads of government. By the time they gathered in Havana, Cuba in 1966, 11 years later, they came not only as heads of government, but also heads of movements. The key figure there being Amilcar Cabral. I want to mention Amilcar Cabral's name because of how well Cabo Verde has done in this World Cup. I must say, I want to put my cards on the table that I'm all for Mexico in every match that is going to play, and I'm sure Mexico is going to win the World Cup. But until now, it had been Cabo Verde. I'm certainly not for any of the other teams. I was quite happy to see Germany be defeated. But all that said, sorry, Franziska, all that said, it is the 60th anniversary of the Tricontinental Conference, a conference that gives our institute its name. It's an institute for the battle of ideas. In other words, an institute that argues for a much more human-centered perspective on the dynamic of world history. We don't want to see rearm Europe. We don't want to see more military bases in Asia. Our perspective is utterly different. We're going to hear first from Comrade Kwesi Pratt Jr. on our 100th dossier, which is called The Future, a dossier that makes us very proud because it means for 100 consecutive months, we've produced a pretty high quality document. And this is the concept, the future, which we've been incubating from essentially the start of our process till now. And after Comrade Kwesi has spoken, we're going to hear from our coordinators from the different regions so that they can come at us with their short, brief visions for what the future might look like in these regions. Tough times for the world, the angry tide in the Americas, the new Cold War in Asia, and the intensified wars and IMF pressure in Africa. Tough times, but hope always. Hope always. So, Comrade Kwesi, would you like to take over now? Welcome to this platform. Welcome from your research institute. We really look to you for your counsel. I think right through our 10 years, we've sought your counsel. We've followed your advice, and we're really looking forward to what you're going to say about this text called The Future. So it's over to you, Comrade Kwesi.
Well, comrades, I'm exceedingly proud to be associated with the celebration of 60 years of Tricontinental and 10 years of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. And I'd like to thank you very much for this invitation, which brings me into your presence, the presence of all of you, very accomplished comrades in your own right and so. First of all, the Marxist law of motion leaves no doubt at all that the future is already under construction. The only question is who is building it and is whose interest. There's a question that we must confront honestly. The future is not a mystery waiting to be unraveled. It is not a prophecy. It is not a dream floating above society. The future is produced by struggle. It is shaped by power. It is built by social forces acting in the present. Every policy adopted today, every resource extracted today, every wage denied today, every school unfounded today, every river poisoned today, every public asset that is privatized today, and every worker that is silent is already preparing a particular future. If we leave the future to capital, imperialism, war, ecological destruction, and inequality, then the future will be one of deeper misery for the majority. But if working people organize, if youth organize, if women organize, if farmers organize, if students organize, if trade unions organize, and if communities organize, then the future can become one of dignity, justice, sovereignty, equality, and socialism. That is why our team, The Future We Build It Now, is not a slogan. It is indeed a responsibility. Marxism teaches us that society is always in motion. No social system is permanent. No ruling class rules forever. No form of exploitation is eternal. Human society develops through contradictions, conflicts, and struggles. The Marxist law of motion helps us to understand that the future grows out of the contradictions of the present. Under capitalism, workers produce wealth, but capital appropriates it. The farmer grows food, but does not control the market. The miner extracts gold, but lives in poverty. The teacher educates the child, but struggles to survive. The nurse protects life, but works under pressure. The young graduate is told to be innovative, but finds no decent work. The woman carries unpaid labor in the home and underpaid labor in the market, factory, office, and farm. Society produces more than enough to meet human needs, yet millions remain hungry, homeless, unemployed, and insecure. This is not because humanity lacks resources. It is not because the world lacks knowledge. It is not because production is organized for profit. It is not because production is not organized for human control. A hungry worker does not experience freedom as a class. A jobless graduate does not experience sovereignty as a national anthem. A farmer cheated by the market does not experience independence as a parade. For the working people, freedom must mean bread, land, shelter, dignity, power, and control over the conditions of life. The future, therefore, is not determined by wishful thinking. It is determined by struggle. It is determined by the struggle between labor and capital, between imperialism and national liberation, between private profit and public need, between ecological destruction and social survival, between domination of the few and the power of the many. Comrades, let us look at the world today. We are living through a deep crisis of the capitalist system. It is a crisis of livelihood because workers everywhere face low wages, insecure employment, rising prices and attacks on social protection. It's a crisis of sovereignty because many countries of Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean are trapped by debt, unequal trade, foreign domination, and the dictates of international finance. It's a crisis of survival because war, militarization, racism, migration crisis, environmental destruction, and climate change threaten the very conditions of human life. The world has enough food, but hunger persists. The world has enough knowledge, but ignorance is reproduced. The world has enough medical science, but people die because healthcare is treated as a commodity. The world has enough technology to reduce human suffering, but technology is increasingly used to intensify exploitation, surveillance, monopoly control, and war. The world has enough wealth to guarantee a dignified life for all, but that wealth is concentrated in the hands of a tiny minority. This is the madness of capitalism. Africa knows this madness very well. Our continent is rich in gold, oil, gas, lithium, bauxite, manganese, cobalt, cocoa, timber, water, land, sunshine, wind, culture, and human talent. Yet Africa remains poor in the global division of labor. We export raw materials and import finished goods. We produce wealth and import poverty. We are praised for our resources, but punished when we demand control over them. We are told to open our markets while others protect theirs. We are told to privatize while the powerful states protect their strategic industries. We are told to cut public spending while the same global system spend endlessly on weapons of war and the rescue of banks. In Ghana, this contradiction is visible everywhere. We have gold, yet mining communities are very, very poor. We have rivers, yet many are poisoned. We have fertile land, yet food insecurity grows. We have oil, yet fuel prices burden the workers. We have educated youth, yet unemployment and underemployment destroy hope. We have public institutions, yet public services are weakened. We have elections, yet the economy remains under the pressure of debt, creditors, conditionalities, and the interest of local and foreign capital. This is why the class struggle must remain at the center of our politics. Class struggle is not an abstract phrase. It is the daily reality of worker negotiating wages. It is the struggle of the farmer against exploitation. It is the struggle of the unemployed youth against exclusion. It is the struggle of the teacher for decent conditions. It is the struggle of the nurse for proper equipment and respect. It is the struggle of the informal worker for protection. It is the struggle of the pensioner for security. It is the struggle of communities against floods, poor roads, bad drainage, pollution, and neglect. The struggle for wages is not a narrow struggle. When workers demand living wages, they are demanding the right to live with dignity. When workers defend trade union rights, they are defending democracy where wealth is produced. When workers demand safe working conditions, they are demanding the right to return home alive. The workplace is not outside politics. The workplace is one of the most important sides of politics because it is where exploitation is organized and where wealth is created. But the struggle cannot end with wages. We must fight for social services as rights. Education, healthcare, housing, transportation, water, sanitation, electricity, and social protection are not gifts from the benevolent governments. They are not charity. They are rights won through struggle and sustained public investment. A child should not be denied quality education because the parents are poor. A patient should not die because healthcare is unaffordable. A worker should not spend a large part of daily income simply moving from home to work and from work to home. A family should not live in fear whenever the clouds gather because drains are choked, settlements are unplanned, public investment has failed. A society that abandons public services abandons its people. We must also take seriously the struggles against racism, gender oppression, youth exclusion, ethnic manipulation, attack on trade union rights, and all forms of discrimination. These are not secondary struggles. Racism was central to slavery, colonialism, and imperial domination. Women suffer exploitation both in production and in the unpaid labor that sustains family and society. Youth are praised as the future while being denied work, land, education, credit, and meaningful participation. Trade unions are attacked because capital fears organized labor. But these struggles must not be separated from class struggle or turned into weapons for dividing the people. A socialist approach recognizes specific forms of oppression while uniting all the oppressed around their common material interest. We reject any politics that turns workers against workers, men against women, citizens against migrants, ethnic groups against one another, formal workers against informal workers, or youth against elders. The enemy is not the poor person beside us. The enemy is the system that exploits all of us in different ways. The environmental struggle must be central to the future we build. We cannot build a just future on poisoned rivers, destroyed forests, polluted air, degraded land, and flooded communities. In Ghana, Galamsey has shown us what happens when land and water are sacrificed for private greed, corruption, and weak public control. Floods in our cities show us what happens when planning is subordinated to profit and neglect. Environmental destruction is not simply a technical problem, it's a class question. It's a question of ownership, control, accountability, and the purpose of production. Ecological justice requires democratic public control over natural resources. It requires planning, it requires science, it requires community participation. It requires that production be organized to protect life, not destroy it for profit. This brings us to the question of unity. No single struggle can win the future alone. Workers cannot fight alone. Farmers cannot fight alone. Students cannot fight alone. Women cannot fight alone. Trade unions cannot fight alone. Environmental movements cannot fight alone. Pan-African organizations cannot fight alone. Socialist forces cannot speak only to themselves and expect society to change. The ruling class survives partly because it divides the people. It tells the unemployed youth that workers are privileged. It tells formal workers that informal workers are disordered. It tells citizens that migrants are the problem. It tells men that women's liberation is a threat. And it tells ethnic groups that their neighbors are enemies. It tells Africans that our problems are only national, when in fact, they are also continental and global. Against this, we must build broad fronts of workers, farmers, youth, women, students, intellectuals, trade unions, cooperatives, community organizations, environmental movements, anti-racist movements, Pan-African organizations, and socialist forces. But comrades, let us be clear. Unity does not mean confusion. Indeed, it should not mean confusion. A broad front must have political direction. It must be rooted in working class leadership, ideological clarity, discipline, and organization. It must connect immediate struggles of the people to the larger struggles for socialism. The fight for wages must be connected to the fight for public ownership. The fight for schools must be connected to the fight for national planning. The fight against Ghassane must be connected to the fight for control over resources. The fight against debt must be connected to the fight against imperialism. The fight for African unity must necessarily be connected to the fight for control over Africa's wealth. The question before us is not only whether Ghana needs roads, schools, hospitals, factories, and jobs. Of course, we need them. The deeper question is who owns them, who controls them, who benefits from them, and whose class interests do these resources serve? That is why we need a program for the reconstruction of society. Capitalism cannot solve the problems it has created. It cannot abolish exploitation because exploitation is the source of profit. It cannot end inequality because inequality is built into private ownership of the means of production. It cannot protect the environment because nature is subordinated to accumulation. It cannot guarantee peace because imperialist competition produces war. It cannot give Africa full sovereignty because African dependency is profitable to the global capitalist system. We must therefore struggle for a society in which the working class ultimately controls the means of production and distribution. This means democratic public ownership of strategic sectors. It means planned development. It means industrialization based on national and continental needs. It means food sovereignty. It means decent work. It means universal education, accessible healthcare, public housing, reliable public transport, clean water, sanitation, electricity. It means workers' rights, cooperative production, scientific development, cultural renewal, and Pan-African economic integration. Socialism is not merely a slogan. It is the practical reorganization of society around human need instead of private profit It is democracy extended into the economy, the workplace, the farm, the school, the hospital, the community, and the state. It is the insistence that those who produce wealth must have power over how wealth is used. In Ghana, this struggle has deep historical roots. The anti-colonial struggle was not simply a demand for political office. It was a demand for dignity, development, and African emancipation. Osadifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah understood that Ghana's independence would be meaningless unless it was linked to the total liberation of Africa. That warning remains urgent even today. Ghana cannot be truly free while Africa is divided, exploited, indebted, and militarized. Ghana cannot be prosperous while Africa's resources are controlled from outside. Ghana cannot build a socialist future in isolation from the struggles of Africa and the global South. To build the future now, we must revive Pan-Africanism as a program of action. We must fight for African control over African resources. We must build continental industries, transport networks, scientific institutions, media platforms, educational systems, and mechanisms for defending sovereignty. We must stand with peoples resisting imperialism, occupation, racism, sanctions, exploitation, and exploitation. Solidarity is not charity. Solidarity must be seen as a weapon of liberation. Comrades, capital is building its future. Imperialism is building its future. The arms industry is busily building its future. The banks are building their future. The mining corporations are building their own future. The technology monopolies are building their future. The political elites are also busily building their future. The question is, are the working people building our own future? We cannot wait for history to save us. History does not move by wishes. It moves through organized forces. It moves when people study, organize, mobilize, sacrifice, and struggle. It moves when workers discover their power. It moves when youth reject despair and embrace discipline. It moves when women's struggles become central to transformation. It moves when intellectuals place knowledge at the service of the people. It moves when trade unions rise beyond narrow economism and become schools of class consciousness. It moves when communities cease to be victims and become organized centers of resistance. It moves when we solidarize with the people of Cuba, Iran, Venezuela, and the Saudi Arab Democratic Republic in their confrontation with imperialism in all of its forms. The future would not be handed to us. It will not be donated by the powerful. It will not be delivered by imperialism, by capital, or by charity of the ruling class. The future certainly belongs to those who organize to build it. And for the working people of Ghana, Africa, and the world, that work must begin now. Comrades, we dare not fail in this exercise, or we will face extinction. Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you very much, Comrade Kwesi Pratt. That was terrific. The future is already being built by our adversaries. Are we also building our future consciously? And what kind of future do we want to build? Have we emerged with an architecture? Are our architects and our construction workers at work to build the future in the midst of the class struggle today? I think it's a very powerful statement along the grains of the dossier, which picks up on the ideas of Ernst Bloch, the very important philosopher from the German Democratic Republic, comrade, who made the argument about the not yet. One of my favorite phrases, the not yet. And And Ernst Bloch says that where is the socialism being built today, which is not yet socialism, but is getting there. It's not yet, but it's on the road. What are we doing today to build socialism to advance the class struggle? A very powerful commentary about the urgency of our struggles, not just that we are preparing for something to come in the future, but we're already in the midst of it. So, comrade, what I want to do is to give some time to the coordinators of the Tricontinental team who coordinate the different regions of the world to reflect a little bit on the role of the building of the future in their regions. And I know Carlos and Laura, I know we're going to start with Nuestra America, and I know that it's going to be tough for you. The symbol of that, I'm sorry to say, was that you were just able to squeak out a victory. The Argentinian team squeak out a victory against valiant Cabo Verde. Sorry to keep talking about football, but you know that the Football World Cup is an allegory of world affairs taking place on the land of the vicious empire which cheated against Iran, and now is squeezing the other teams and so on. And there's Cabo Verde, valiant Cabo Verde, almost defeated Argentina. So Nuestra America, difficult position. Carlos, Laura, you got a little time to walk us through this.
Well, thank you, Vijay, and thank everyone. Of course, our leader Kwesi with a wonderful opening for us. Vijay, I don't think, and everyone, I think there's no better place to speak about the future than Venezuela today. I speak to you from a place that was invaded by the United States 6 months ago. I speak to you from a place that has been ravaged by twin earthquakes only a week ago. A place that has taught me that the future, like the present, is a constant struggle and a constant construction. The revolution is not perfect victory, but it's constant transformation, adaptation, reconstruction. We have seen in the last couple of days thousands of volunteers, thousands of servicemen, personnel, workers, everybody. We've seen international solidarity here playing out what that future should look like, what that future actually looks like, because we are building it now. So from Tricon, what has been our task in our region and in the whole institute is first to understand the world we live in, to do it from the analysis of concrete conditions. To have a future, we must understand what our present is for what it is, not what we want it to be, not what we think it should be, but what it actually is. That is the Marxist approach that gives us a tool to build something better. But also as humans, I think it's also important for us to believe in a future that if we believe in a future that we must understand from our present struggles, from our suffering, from our needs. We can't build a future for ourselves if we do not feel empathy, if we do not feel solidarity, if we do not understand that our fate lies together with that of others, in particular with those who suffer. I think a future requires us to understand the forces we're fighting against as well. I think because this is a fight, this is a fight. It's always going to be a fight. Because in our history, we have achieved victories. And we walk on the path of those who have won before us, and the faith and face the wrath of those who have lost their privileges and have thrived from injustice. So there is a fight. And we have to understand where we are in the movement, with this movement of the right wing of the special type is now, where we're staking humanity. The future is building, like Kwesi said. We have to build a future that closes the possibility of exclusion, of oppression, of exploitation and even for deceit. We need to describe the world in our own voices as well. The world we live in. At Tricon, we're currently working on building a Marxist theory of geopolitics because we believe that the world is not just a struggle between states. The world is the movement of its workers, of its exploited classes fighting against the vicious corporations that today have even more power than the nation states themselves. Our future is the one that we have been building Nuestra America since 200 years ago. Not the multipolar world that confronts different powers. It's the world that Bolivar envisioned in the Panama Congress of equilibrium, where the right of one people doesn't impose on the right of others, but rather they find common ground to build a balanced world together. So what is the future? The future is revolution. The future is securing a place to dwell, food on our table, clothes on our backs, space to gather and build together. You could take it from when we learned from our comrades in China, the two issues not to worry about, the three guarantees for all. The future is the solidarity we have seen built in Cuba, where doctors save people everywhere despite the sanctions. The future is organizing into communes collectively, as we have seen here in Venezuela, to feed ourselves despite the blockade. The future is proving that we can't be defeated in the present, no matter what they do. We fight to win, like Vijay has said, but we've learned also that winning is a collective effort, it's a collective experience. Our not yet here it was Chavez's por ahora. It was a message that, you know, we are in the struggle. We know that we may not have all the answers at this moment, but we will have them one day. And I remember, and with this I turned too loud, but I remember that one of the last times I heard Chavez speak personally, he said to us, paraphrasing a Venezuelan poet, "What does it matter if my own eyes never see the country I dream of, so long as my blood quickens in the eyes of those who will." And I think that is the message for us. We'll be there in the future because the future is the collective effort we're building now and that we will continue to build, even if we personally are not there. Thanks.
Continúo, solo creo que es difícil después de Carlos, después de ese comentario, creo que
I'll
solo
continue.
algunos
It's
elementos
hard
que
to
nuestros compañeros
talk after
de
Carlos, you
nuestra
know.
región
There's some elements, my comrades, that connected to our region that are so connected to this idea of the future, right? So this attempts of showing that everything that we do in the present is not connected to this future, right? Like, well, as Vijay said, socialism is not that will happening right now, but it will come. But it's something that is being planted in the present, right? So in the Carlos mentioned about what happened in Venezuela, especially this year, right? We have been elements, or we have been seeing how this process works, you know? So, and I think there's some important elements to think about what is happening in the region, right? Like how the far right processes had strengthened in our region, and it seemed like our future will be more complicated, or made it seem that the future is this future is the only option. But it said again and again, the capitalism has no future to give us, to offer us. So we have to fight right now in the present, right? First, in many senses, one is recovering our history. We already have elements to building life of dignity, with emancipation for the peoples, and our countries don't. We know that there are points there are dreams that weren't able to be achieved yet, but we can look for them, and this is an element of our revolutionary history, right? And also we have the contradiction that we have to live with when we have complex contexts such as the current one, with the ultra-right governments and the coming to our countries. And it seems to me that spaces of research, such as the Tricon, is there for us to think about the urgent for the people today. And then, of course, there's the urgent, the necessary, and the what is immediately possible. Sometimes comrades that are intellectuals or they end up abandoning this strategic idea of the future, you know? Like we have to do the research and think, but also always keep in mind that tomorrow it has to be a characteristics of the struggle that we do in our continent. We have to strengthen the revolutionary elements in all the steps that we take. And we can never give in, even if we can never give in the socialist project, even if it feels odd, because they say it's too odd, it's too far away, you know. But like the far right can always talk about the fascist project, you know, and they can bring back things that have been buried in the past. And we here had to use euphemisms and use other words to actually mention our project that is actually socialist, you know. So I think it's important that we deny also from our political practice the defeatism, the sense of like, oh, we're completely defeated. This has not been a year that has been easy at all, right? We have been defeated in terms of like electoral disputes and in terms of sovereignty, you know. But we're working in this construction of the utopia, this provocation that Fidel will bring us. We have to build and make dreams reality, but not out of idealism, but actually out of the political practice of this organization. So then that's the central need of the intellectual work, the work of intellectuals that are working together with the organizations, with the people, with the bases. You know, just to close, I wanted to mention this phrase of that Che Guevara said to he wrote to the Tricon magazine a year after the conference happened, this conference that we are celebrating right now. And this phrase, I believe it's a mandate for our present, and it's a challenge for us. He said, is this the socialist revolution, or is it just something else? You know, we're going to bring the socialists in the future. We have to, what it has to come is with an emancipatory project for the future of our peoples.
Excellent, excellent work, Laura and Carlos. Simon Bolivar's thought 200 plus years ago about seeking a new equilibrium. Today is the 250th anniversary of the establishment of the United States. It's a very interesting anniversary. The United States established and has written its history as a kind of history against colonialism, claiming it was a history against, it was a war of liberation against the British Empire. But in fact, it was not exactly that. It was a war for the movement out of the 13 colonies to take the rest of the territory. It was liberation to become a settler colony and to go beyond the 13 colonies and to take the rest of the lands, including later wrest a third of Mexico, as President Claudia Sheinbaum reminded us recently. Our 100th dossier and our 10th year anniversary has brought us greetings from the General Secretary of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, Comrade M.A. Baby. I just received a note from a Member of Parliament from North Islington, Jeremy Corbyn, sending us greetings. People sending us greetings because they find the work useful, and we are therefore inspired to continue the work, and we ask you to join us in the battle of ideas. I'm going to turn it over to Comrade Mika. Mika is a co-coordinator of the Pan-Africa project of Tricontinental. She is going to present for a few minutes on the aspects of the future. Very interesting question has come in from Khagendra Prasad in Nepal, asking what are the kinds of class configurations, for instance, in Ghana, that would enable a push towards a revolutionary process. It's an interesting question. It bears on a project that our Department of Historical Sociology is working on, which is a class analysis module, starting with Brazil, but we have a project also of looking at this with the Accra Center for Applied Research on Ghana. It's a very important question about doing an accurate analysis of the class structures and classes in motion, following, for instance, what Mao Zedong did in 1927 with his report on the investigation on Hunan. We're trying to pick up that methodology and do our own struggles. So, Comrade Khagendra Prasad, very good question. And that is something that one has to research and look at with care, not speculate. Mika, I'm sorry to take up some of the time here, but you have about 5 minutes or so, and I'm going to hand it over to you. You're talking to us from South Africa. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see everyone and to be here in this 10-year anniversary. As Vijay mentioned, I'm in South Africa right now in a political education school at the Nkrumah School, which I think is a project of the future. And I think a project of the future linked to, as we say in the end of the dossier, hope as praxis. Because we said that hope becomes real when it turns into not just a promise, but a plan. And I think that the schooling processes that we have, that Tricontinental contributes to in terms of servicing intellectual, educational needs, is part of, I think, the material force that we are contributing to and that helps to build the future that we want to construct with the working class. And I'm really excited because I realized, Vijay, I think we messed up because the dossier it starts with the word future in different languages. And I realized we didn't have one African language used there. And here today we have translation in French and in Swahili.
Except Arabic.
Yes, but I'm talking Southern African language. And I was asking the Swahili-speaking comrades we have comrades coming from Kenya, Tanzania, people who come from the Congo who also speak Kiswahili. What is future in Kiswahili? And it's I'm going to butcher it, but wakati ujao, which is the time that is coming. So it is also similar to many of our languages. But in the process of us discussing this, a comrade from Burkina Faso mentioned in the language of the Mossi people, there's not really, in a lot of African languages, there's not really a word that captures the future we talk about in the dossier. I think a lot of Latin languages, in the word, there's a kind of epistemology where you take this bit and then you break it down and you find its roots. But in African languages, it actually has, I think, a little bit more of a dialectical sensibility because it's more about words in relation to one another. And they were talking about a phrase that basically, in the More language, a word that relates to future and that people think about the future and use it in day-to-day language, they say, today's trousers are worth more than tomorrow's breeches. And essentially that the future we talk about is not deferring to the future that may not arrive. It's about acting today on the future we want. And I just thought that was quite instructive and interesting because that's the kind of futurity we are projecting in our projects that is articulated inside the study. And by the way, the study, the dossier, is in this really thick reading pack, which is the reading pack of the course, which is basically themed around the 100th anniversary of Fidel Castro and his contributions as an internationalist to the African liberation struggles and the questions of sovereignty. So I start off there just because I think that this is the future, is the process of education with cadres from across the continent, cadres from different language backgrounds, all the kind of divisions that colonialism put in place that allowed a lack of a collective imagination about what the future holds for us. Then I think that in terms of the work we're doing in Tricontinental Pan-Africa specifically, we know that we are faced with two major issues, is that when people ask us to imagine about what Africa's future is, we usually have two kind of predictable scripts. One is the future of crisis, coups, corruption, all these kinds of pathologized negative sentiments and negative phenomenon that basically we're a continent waiting to be stabilized by someone else's peacekeepers or some other, new economic reform plan. And then the second says kind of the opposite, that Africa is rising. I really hate that phrase, Africa is rising, like we were sinking into the ocean and now all of a sudden we're rising. Despite the climate change showing us we are sinking into the ocean more than rising. And it talks about how Africa is, the next generation in terms of growth. People talk about how, look at Niger. Last year, Niger had one of the highest percentages of GDP growth, but it's completely devoid of the context of what that actually means. If you start at zero and you rapidly go catch up with the rest of the world, that doesn't mean it's the growth we want to see and the development model that we're seeking. And so part of the work we're trying to do is to fight against these kinds of ideas of that's what a future looks like, either crisis or this kind of liberal economic growth model that doesn't actually have to do with the development of the people. But of course, we're privileged in this moment, and not privileged, we're fortunate in this moment that we're gathering at a point in time when we're seeing multiple ruptures across the continent, whether it's the alliance of the Sahel states, where we are, again, I think it's part of our work that we've been doing with the studies we're putting out and the future studies we'll put out, is trying to also show what is the day-to-day ongoing things that are happening, not just at the level of the press statements that come out from the government, but we have 3 Thomas Sankara centers are represented here. There are 3 Thomas Sankara centers in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And all 3 of them are working to disseminate the thinking of Thomas Sankara and the kind of epistemological basis upon which he built the project in Burkina Faso about 4 or 5 decades ago. And this recovery of that is also about the future. It's not returning to the source in a kind of primordial past of Africa pre-colonial, but this retrieval of the things that were lost during the various phases of imperialist attack, imperialist oppression, and seeing the livingness of and liveliness of the debates that are coming out of the Alliance of Sahel States has also completely revived a lot of the thinking and the debates in all parts of the continent, whether it's the Kenyans who basically were applauding when they heard that Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso was going to visit their country. The whole of Kenya was applauding, and it gave them, the courage to continue to want to push for changes in their own society. Whether it's in South Africa, where we were seeing the new energies amongst the left to unite together. We had a conference of the left a couple of months ago, and groups like the South African Communist Party are trying to, push themselves towards a better sense of futurity by building what they're calling the People's Red Caravans, which is a really interesting political process of, we say in the dossier, you have to inspire political imagination by addressing material conditions. And this is what the SACP and many others are doing on the continent. And so I'm throwing out a bunch of different things, but I hope it's to say that I think there's a moment, this new mood that we've been talking about for the last 5-6 years, this new mood has a material force behind it. And the social forces that we raised, the question that Comrade Kwesi raised, the social forces who are pushing and advancing these processes are with us. They're not some distant academic exercise of the Tricontinental. We live and breathe and sleep and think and argue with everyone daily. And processes like our educational schools, processes led by the IPA, allow us to continue to coalesce those energies in the right places so that we're not fighting multiple different struggles on multiple different stages, but are kind of more focused than ever on the same kind of objectives with different tactics and different expressions, but nonetheless towards the same socialist future that has hope, that has dignity, and that puts the protagonism of the people and their well-being at the forefront.
Bravo, Mika. Thanks a lot. Just to continue with our various greetings, you mentioned the South African Communist Party. There is greetings from General Secretary Solly Mikaela. We have also from South Africa, the National Union of Metal Workers, Comrade Irving Jim. Lots of people happy with the work we're doing, which makes me very happy and I think makes our team very happy. We appreciate all the notes of support that come from comrades. This is an institute that works with movements to build accurate and clarifying material for and alongside movements. And we're always happy to know that the work is both useful and accurate. We're going to go to Asia now. We've got, again, two coordinators, remarkable Asia, one from India, one from China. Put them together, they're half the population of the world. That's our comrades Tings and Atul. Comrades Tings and Atuls, go ahead.
Thanks, Vijay, and it's really an honor to be here and share this panel, of course, with Comrade Kwesi and all the other coordinators and colleagues of Tricontinental. So speaking from Asia, I mean, I've been thinking about this moment, reflecting on 60 years since the Tricontinental Conference, and how much, the shape of the world has changed. At that moment, we saw peoples from Africa, Latin America, Asia coming together and believing that the future could be won through struggles for national liberation, for sovereignty, and for socialism, as the horizon. Of course, now, I think 60 years later, the world looks different. And Asia is not only the most populous continent, Vijay, but also has become the center of gravity economically. And as Mika and others have said, this reemergence of the global south, as we call it today, as a force still discovering itself. And of course, China has been the world's largest socialist project in construction, always in construction. But I think precisely because Asia has become so central in shaping this future in this sort of contest, that it has become this principal terrain on which imperialism is seeking to preserve its hegemony. And I was thinking about, the quote about Mao Zedong. Sorry, I can't do a talk without quoting him once at least. Around the time of Tricontinental, when he was saying that imperialism created two great outposts in Asia, Israel in the west, against the Palestinian people, and then Taiwan in the east, directed against the, communist Chinese project. And I think we see those two outposts continue to anchor this expanding architecture of imperialism and militarization across Asia. And it's here where that contradiction between imperialism and the aspirations for sovereignty of the peoples of the global south is expressed with a kind of particular sharpness. But I think there's also another side that we're trying to explore more, is that Asia isn't just where imperialism concentrates its forces, it's also where some of the greatest hopes for humanity's future is. We see the unfinished struggle for Palestinian liberation. I know that, of course, Ghassane will speak for the region, but Palestine is also in the Asian continent. We see the heroic defense of Iran's sovereignty and the continuing construction of socialism across Asia, not just in China. And I think that the Tricontinental Conference that gave political expression to those aspirations is something we need to still renew as a spirit today to build that hope of a future, of course, under very different historical conditions. So I think understanding Asia isn't just a regional task, not a task of Tricontinental Asia, but I want to share just quickly some of the things we've been doing to try to engage in this battle of ideas that help us keep pace with this changing shape of the world. And so at Tricontinental Asia, we've been every fortnight publishing the Tricontinental Asia newsletter, and this is where we're trying to build a network of movement leaders and intellectuals to, engage in this conversation. Our last issue was called Iran and the Shield That Became a Bullseye, that really brings this voice from the ground to say that this illusion of U.S. military bases for its allies in the region is really an illusion. They become targets once there is retaliation and resistance. Every 2 months, we publish the Tricontinental Interventions, and that's, offering conjunctural analysis, diving deeper into the most pressing issues of our time. Just next week, we're going to be publishing a TICA, they're called TICAs, the Taiwan question from civil war to external intervention, and that gives us some of the historical roots to one of today's most dangerous flashpoints. And together, we've been collaborating with the Global South Academic Forum, based in China, but it's an international project to publish the Wenhua Zonghang. It's a journal on contemporary Chinese thought, as well as a weekly bulletin called News on China. We're trying to cut through some of the noise and disinformation to connect Global South scholars, activists, movement leaders to understand the processes happening in China and in China in relation to the rest of the world. And I'll just maybe wrap up here is that one of the essays we published was Vijay's last year called Is Asia Possible? And it always seems like such a simple and it's deceptively simple question, but it's been a question so elusive to the peoples of Asia for decades, if not centuries, but one that is increasingly urgent. And so I think to think about the future and think of the future of Asia is also about how do we build that Asian unity, solidarity, internationalism, and not just thinking about this future of sovereignty and also the socialist horizon, not as just one of many possible futures, but as an inevitable movement of history, and then we must believe in that future and fight for that future. And so I'm going to pass the word to Comrade Atul, who coordinates Tricontinental Asia with me, to talk about how our work also seeks to strengthen that unity amongst people's movements in the region. So thank you, comrades.
Thank you so much, Tings, and thank you to everyone who was involved in organizing this webinar, a very important webinar. Comrades and friends, first of all, I would really like to remember the person who was instrumental, in my opinion. One of the key persons in organizing the Tricontinental Conference was Mehdi bin Barka. I mean, it's important to remember him because he not only brought the two currents. He was the main key person who brought the two, I would say, the themes. One was, of course, the socialist revolution current, and of course the current of the national liberation. And I think that's important. That's very important for me to talk about this, because in our institute, these are also two of the major themes. We sort of work on that, and it also guides us in our future work, and also to sort of imagine the future. Comrades, I speak to you from the Asia office, and at the time I just want to make one argument before I sort of start with anything, and that is to make concretely is from the work our team does in Asia. Uh, uh, it is not the legacy which we are trying to follow of the Tricontinental Conference, but it is I would say it is that legacy, that fusion of those two concepts which I just mentioned, which is carried into the conditions of our own sort of country and in this particular century. You all know what's happening in the world. I don't want to go into detail with regard to what our institute has already done with regard to, let's say, conceptualize hyper-imperialism and other stuff. But it's very important to look at those terms. The reason I say this, and I don't even want to go to internationalism, the term of hyper-imperialism at the moment. I just want you to take a look at hyper-imperialism from the domestic angle. What does it do? It has a domestic face. It's very important for us to sort of understand that. And our office is very much involved on that front. Comrades, across the world, we are watching, I think, Comrade Carlos, Vijay, Comrade Kwesi, everyone was already talking about that, how we are seeing across the world that a particular kind of, I would say, which is, we call it far right of a special type, is sort of coming into existence in the world. And this is not simply an old-fashioned fascism, but this is actually, I would say, is advancing towards by dismantling all the liberal order which was achieved by a lot of struggle and fights. For example, they are destroying all the welfarist model any country had. They want to withdraw the state from any role they can play. They want to sort of take away any rights which the workers had. So all of those things are very important. And coming on that, the Asia office is sort of, I'll be very concrete, works on 4 fronts. What are those 4 fronts? One is, of course, the culture and understanding the right. That's important. When I was talking about the far right of a special type, we get sort of, I would say we get very sad knowing that a lot of every time there are elections, there are frustrations, there is inequality, people are unhappy, but they still win the election. I think it's very important to engage with these questions, and that is going to happen from the cultural perspective. It's very important to understand that why across our continent a bourgeois cultural hegemony is actually existing and also sort of leading. It's very important to understand the right wing measure, why we see which works day and night in between between working class people, and it sort of divides the society against each other, be it by religion, be it by caste, by language, by community, by country. So that's one question. And we see that all of them actually, so for example, when you read the dossier, you will see that there are questions framed that how important questions for workers are not actually are pointed towards, let's say, the bourgeois class, but it is pointed towards fellow workers. For example, the migrant workers, the question of migrant workers. Those are very important. I would say that's the first front we want to fight on. The second, of course, Tings has already talked about it, is the basis and the trade pacts which we see in our region. There are different sort of publications also coming from our office. So I don't want to go into that, but I would just like to say that that's one of our second front where we want to really sort of engage with movements and fight. The third front is the sovereignty and national development. It's a very important question for us, and today that question is, in my opinion, is being decided by the finance capital on any field you take. Consider the architecture of debt, for example, in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan, Bangladesh. Anyway, you just take it. The external debt of the developing world has reached a record $11.4 trillion. In a single year, the global south paid almost like $920 billion merely in interest. So these are the very important questions for us to deal with as an, I would say, the Tricontinental Asia office, to deal with these questions with our fellow comrades, fellow organizations in different countries. Then there is the fourth front. Comrades, as I think when Tings was mentioning, it's very important that remember when she was saying that Asia is becoming the core battlefield or the core geographically sensitive area where a lot of things are happening at the moment. She mentioned the economic perspective, but based in and around that, you also need to see what all things has been happening. So, for example, the movements. We saw so many movements in the last 2-3 years. You take it, Bangladesh, where there was a regime change. You take Indonesia, where a delivery worker died, and that led to the parliamentary privileges for the member of parliaments. Then Sri Lanka, of course, where the debt question came in, and a sitting president was forced to resign. Then again, the Nepal thing, which happened last year. We all saw what's happening. But then again, comrades, it brings us to a very important question that all this anger of the working class people, how this anger is being channeled into again sort of getting the same sort of class dynamics, or people who sort of lead those class interests actually come into the power. And these are very important fronts from our institute to sort of engage with, to work with. And that's where I would say it's very important as an institution for us to work. Then, comrades, the one of the major, I think, is recent events I would like to really bring to your notice is one, of course, the attack on Iran. I would say from by Israel and US, and you saw how the whole leadership of the country was assassinated. But also remember, just last week, a report came on the killing of the children in Palestine by the Israeli forces. One of the judges is an Indian judge, Justice Muralidhar, I mean, who came with that report. It's important. These reports need to be talked about in our sort of confrontation with the hegemonic classes, comrade. It's important. I somehow feel that these things are not being talked about a lot. A lot of things need to be talked about, and to take these issues forward. I'll end with something which is very important, where we want to talk about future, but it's very important to talk about unity. I mean, comrades, if we don't talk about unity, if we don't sort of organize our forces, if we don't sort of understand what are the forces we are fighting against, if we don't sort of bring in, even for example, in a lot of conferences now, I have sort of accompanied Vijay. And I remember from last a couple of years back in Australia, when he was talking about in Australia, he talked about how the liberal parties, like the liberal parties who were not communal, need to be brought in and engaged. And I was sitting in the audience, I was like, he has gone crazy. Why is he saying that we should deal with Indian National Congress and other parties? They're all bourgeois parties. But then again, I mean, I later on, I mean, I had the privilege to accompany him to other conferences too, where I sort of understood and discussed. It's important that that field has been left open. The far right has, with of course the fascist tendencies, has taken over, and even the liberal parties which used to fight for the welfarist model, some sort of a gain for working class, is not there anymore. And it's important, and that is an extra burden on, I would say, on the left, to sort of even fight those battles now. So that's, I think, comrade, in my opinion, the one of the major tasks for our institute and our people on the, let's say, in the peace movement on the left, who are with the people's organization. It's important to unify, to come together, and to resist sort of these forces. Or else, again, the more fragmented we are only going to keep on losing our battles. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Atul. That was very, very interesting, especially the anecdote about building our forces, our class cohesion first our own class confidence and clarity, and then the need to broaden our alliance base. That's a very important thing to think about. Quick greetings from South Asia, Comrade Madhav Nepal, one of the leaders of the Nepali Communist Party, and we're very happy to have with us Comrade Inamul Haq from the Workers' Party of Bangladesh. A very difficult situation in both Nepal and Bangladesh. The class question at the center of it, comrades. There is this interesting phenomena called the Gen Z, which is a largely manufactured concept. The class character of these protests is being undermined by the use of this brand name. It's part of the sort of United Statesization of politics. We completely reject the idea that this is principally a generational contradiction. We know very well that this is a contradiction of classes at play. Nobody knows this better than our comrade John Ross, who is with us here from the United Kingdom, one of the leading economists, former advisor to Ken Livingstone, and one of the key people in our platform, No Cold War. I see that Comrade Bandile is here from No Cold War. Comrade Biliana is here from No Cold War. A series of people are here from that platform. Very important. We don't want a Cold War, but we don't want hot ones either. This is the week of celebration, commemoration of the life of Ali Khamenei, who was assassinated by the Israelis earlier this year. The Israelis are threatening to kill Mujtaba Khamenei, the current supreme leader. Ghassane, it's a hot war always in West Asia and in North Africa. Ghassane is the coordinator of our projects in that region. He is, of course, from the land of Mehdi Ben Barka. Ghassane, Alan Wasalan.
Thank you very much, Vijay. Welcome, everybody. And I'm very grateful to all the speeches and descriptions about our current situation and the future that we are seeking to build all together. Of course, today I'm just sharing with you some reflections about what's happening in the North Africa and Western Asian region, which is marked by growing genocide in Gaza, in Palestine, assassination, targeted assassination of people, women and the children in Lebanon, in Iran, and Syria. Today, there are more than 4,300 people assassinated in Gaza. More than 3/3 of them are children and old people. There are 73,000 people killed during the genocide operation. And despite what you call this ceasefire, every day there are people, women, children being targeted. Today, the whole world has witnessed the ongoing genocide, which is not happened by chance. It's a continuation of Western imperialism. It's what the world has witnessed on live stream about continuous racist apartheid and genocide of the Israel Zionist entity that has been targeting the Palestinian people, the whole Syrian and Lebanese people. And now today it became clear to the whole world that it's an instrument to weaken the people's aspiration, to shut any resistance to this unfair world system, and also to establish a world order that is for the profit of the big imperialist states. In the Western African and the Arab region, Africa, Asia, all what we heard from our friends and our comrades who are with us here, it's a continuous history of struggle against injustices, against apartheid, against colonialism. And it's a struggle for building a human world system, for building the world system where people are living in freedom, are taking advantage of their wealth, and also where humanity is a common value with all the people without distinction. So from the region and its perspective, this genocide is not happening by chance. It's a continuation of a whole history of colonialism and of imperialism. Since the occupation of Algeria in 1830, the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, which divided the Arab East, the Balfour Declaration of 1917, the San Ramon Conference, and the separation of Palestine in 1920, all of which have paved the way for the ongoing genocide of the Zionist Israeli army. It's also what paved the way for the brutality of the US attacks against all the resistance axis. We believe that this is not only a war about destructing the resistance, it's a war about disrupting hope, destructing the will of the people to see a better world, either by killing that will inside the people or by killing the people themselves. They are ready to eliminate all the people just to take advantage what exists of wealth, of strategic value, and also to maintain an unfair capitalist world system. I also believe that this war is not only on military level. The Arab economies has already been integrated into imperialist capitalist division of labor. International global chain, production chain. It also functions as a market for the goods of the multinationals and also a source of mainly energy-related raw materials. We believe also that the dependency of those states to the Western imperialism, and I mean especially the Gulf states, the Egypt, and all those countries who have established Abraham Accords, it didn't bring them strengths. It brings them more weaknesses. It brings them more objections to the Israeli and American threats to energy, to also to power and to domination. In most of those countries, they are ruled by reactionary compradors, bourgeoisie, whose functions as proxies of imperialism. They are suppressing all the progressive aspiration of their people to freedom and to also build a better world. Other countries, states that has once been described as national states like Syria, Iraq, Libya, they have been collapsed. They have been destroyed. I believe that their destruction is not only because of the Western sanctions and interventions, it's also because they have gradually been integrated to the world capitalist system. And at this moment, it's very important to converge both the resistance against war, against genocide, against apartheid, with the aspiration to build independent economies, to build collective and regional related economies instead of subjected common economies to world power. The principal trait of today of the people of the region is not from outside of the world. It's from the Zionist entity, which serves as entryment to the capitalist Western domination, and also from the main brutal force that is functioning now as the core of this imperialist world system, which is the United States. We believe also that those forces, those imperialist forces, have been trying to divide the peoples of those regions: Arabs, Persians, Gulfs, Kurds, Turks, Amazighs against Arabs, Shia against Sunni. This all intended to weaken those people, to make them ununited, and also to make the Zionist entity appear as the main democratic integrated power in the region, which serves as a model. We believe also that the repeated military aggression against the region, mainly in Palestine, Syria, and also Iran, Lebanon, has manifested the will of those people of these forces to destroy every emerging resistance. And at this point, I would like to highlight that Iran has represented a principal center of resistance in the region against imperialism and Zionism. Despite the years of sanctions, despite the attacks, they have been succeeded to rebuild their strength. They have also strengthened their network in the region and empowered their capabilities and political resolution to build a national centered regime. Despite also the attacks against Iran, we believe that its resistance and also its victorious resistance has manifested to the whole world that despite the brutality of imperialism, despite the advanced technology of war and killings, if the people have the will, if the people are come together and resist, they can be victorious. We have also all witnessed how the genocide has been normalized by Western media, by Western bourgeoisies. Their narratives about the Jewish Zionist civilization has collapsed, and it appears as a brutal assassination and genocidal ideology that serves for the imperialist interests. Regardless of all these hardships, the resistance of the Palestinian people also, especially in Gaza, despite all the genocide, has manifested also that the people can maintain their resistance even by staying alive, by being alive is a sort of resistance. We also have witnessed how the whole world has stood up in support of Palestine, in support of Lebanon, in support of Iran. Despite ideological differences, people all stood against the genocide and assassination, which has implications for us today, implication to see the future. The future for us is first a battle to take. It's not a battle that we can take or not. It's a battle that we are in and that we need to all advance in different means in this battle. It's a battle against fascism, and it's a task of the progressive intellectuals, progressive forces to take this battle of idea, this battle also of building resistance tools, and also these battles of liberation of the peoples of the world. We believe also that the ideological collapse, the moral collapse, the ethical collapse of the Western narratives puts and lays a responsibility for all the intellectuals to take the battle of idea to build a narrative of the peoples, of the new world order that we are seeking to build. We believe also that we need to unmask the struggles that exist today and make them appear not as battles of ethnicities, battles of languages, battles of cultures, battles of identities. They are social, political, intellectual battles against a capitalist world order that is collapsing, that is dying, and also it's a battle to build the alternative that we want to seek and want to build. We believe that we all need to build this future, but it's a future of returning back to human alternative values that capitalism is trying to destroy. The role of the intellectuals today is to counter and to fight against capitalism, imperialism, Zionism, and reactionarism, and all the reactionary ideologies that exist now. We don't need to share only knowledge. We need also to engage in this struggle about capitalism to build the tools of emancipation of our people. The movements that existed now are willing more than ever, facing all what happened on us, to advance in this struggle. And the intellectuals need to be at the vanguard of this struggle. We need also to defend the interests of our peoples, the working class, the peoples of the world. And this is also a principal task that we need to build in fronts that we believe mainly should against imperialism and fronts about what we want to build. Before they used to say socialism or barbarism. And I would finish by saying, today we are witnessing barbarism. Barbarism is what we live in today. And socialism is the future, but we need to build it today. Thank you.
Bravo, Ghassane, a voice of sanity from Morocco, from the Maghreb region, from our entire Arab project, and of course inclusive of the valiant Iranians who today welcomed their guests to the funeral of Ali Khamenei with a very interesting message. Each of the guests was welcomed with a different surah from the Quran. They welcomed, for instance, the fighters from Palestine as great heroes. They welcomed the Qataris and Emiratis with a surah from the Quran that said, you have had your falsehoods in the past, but come to the right path. And then they welcomed the Egyptians effectively with a very stern warning from the Quran that they better pick up their socks and begin to change their ways. Very, very stirring rhetoric at the funeral of Ali Khamenei, Ghassane. Wonderful work. Lots more people sending their greetings to us, to this project that we are building. We're going to turn now to our comrade from the Zetkin Forum of Social Research, Franziska, who is in Berlin. Berlin was, of course, for us, the capital of Europe East, the capital of the people's democracies at a certain point. One of the cities whose coordinates went Berlin, Moscow, Belgrade, Beijing, Hanoi, and so on in the old days. Berlin now a different place, Franziska. Give us your sense of what is happening as you build more Leopard tanks and continue your own war over there.
Thank you very much for having me here. It's a great pleasure to see all of the coordinators. It's a tough one to speak last, also because I think that when we're talking about the new mood in the Global South, as the Tricon has been doing in the last couple of years, well, we see a new mood in Europe, but it's not the same. It's like a sad and kind of depressed and also fearful mood, and it is not very hopeful. And I think maybe that's something that that is the point that we will need to address. Since the Ukraine war started, the fabricated Russian threat is used to justify rearm and militarize all of Europe. We see industrial policy that is linked to militarization, and military spending is now presented as a historical necessity. That is not very encouraging. And of course, we know that militarization increases class struggle through austerity, through debt, through attacks on jobs and also on wages. And it, of course, hits the working class of Europe at a really bad time. The level of class consciousness is very low. The level of actual organizing even lower. In Germany, we've seen a decrease from 30% to below 15% of actual organized labor. So we find that resistance to these onslaughts is very limited. And though in the last years we have seen mobilizations against the genocide in Gaza, which seemed like there was a movement within Europe, I think it is, or at least these mobilizations or the terrible genocide in Gaza have actually sort of ripped off the last bit of a veil of, I don't know, European enlightenment or human rights or any legitimacy or any sense of superiority of people who have been watching. It didn't translate into working class struggle. Too often unions and labor are actually absent from these struggles. There is differences, but overall there is too little of labor power involved in these mobilizations, which are organized too much through individuals, too much through mobilizations rather than organizations. That being said, there is of course hope. We have just seen that, for example, 2 general strikes in Portugal led to the conservative governments actually taking back the reform packages that they had wanted to impose, which are exactly about this militarization and exactly about this these type of reforms that will harm labor more than they will benefit it. So we see that the point of struggle or the point of work also for something like the Zetkin Forum is, of course, exactly there. It is around, some of the speakers here have said it, Atul has, for example, mentioned, it is with the working class. We do need to go and speak and talk to the working class, organize the working class. And so our work at the Zetkin Forum is centered on around 3 different points at the moment. One of them, which I know is Vijay already made reference to it, is reclaiming the socialist history of these parts of the world. Europe had a lead in some of these, or not maybe a lead, but it does have a socialist history that is worth knowing and understanding better and reminding ourselves of. I can even give a very concrete example. In the socialization of housing is something that has been floated in Germany now for quite a few years. And it is up against, again, in this year's election, which will happen in Berlin. So it's a very local election. However, the federal government has decided that it will be illegal to socialize housing. Most likely, this will be toppled because it even says in the German common law that under certain conditions, socialization or nationalization of for the benefit of the greater good is allowed. However, it was denied, or the way that the media presents this is that we cannot socialize our housing to actually provide affordable housing for the masses, because that would be a reminiscence of the GDR, of the socialism that existed in part of this country, and therefore remind us all or bring us back to a dictatorship. So I think this is where we see how current some of these debates around the reclaiming of socialism still are for us in Europe, and perhaps even for the rest of the world, because why go back behind something that we had already once achieved? Another aspect of our work deals with countering the equidistant position among the fragmented left that we see, especially in Europe, where China is just another imperialist power rising, where BRICS is just another trade organization, and where there is, which is probably part of the hopelessness in Europe, where there is no resistance, where there is only futility and no resistance against any type of imperial or empire forces. So this is something that the Zetkin Forum is, of course, working on, because it is also the foundation of anti-imperialist struggle and the foundation of solidarity, and therefore the foundation of the hope that we will that we seek to instill together with the organizations that we work with. These are just the topics that we deal with, but of course we also say at the Zetkin Forum, we also say theory for praxis. So that means for us that we are in organizations, that we want to work not only with organizations, but that we are in these organizations and we are taking these debates to where they matter and where they belong. And I think this is already for us the most important aspect, to be ourselves also active in the struggles with comrades, but almost more importantly, with the comrades to be. That's it. Thank you.
Bravo, bravo. Wunderbar, he says from Roter Viens. I want to also greet our comrade Corazon Fabros, who's the president, convener of the International Peace Bureau. It's a tough job these days being in the peace movement, our friends. Atul mentioned the text on hyper-imperialism. Highly recommend people go and read it. It's 2 years old, but couldn't be more prescient about what happens once the floodgates opened after the genocide in Gaza began in October of 2023. That text was published in January 2024. Makes a very strong case for understanding the transition to a kind of new system now where about 80% of the world military spending, according to revised estimates by Gisela Serenas, David Vine, and John Bellamy Foster, 80% of world military spending is is conducted by the West and its allies, the collective West. 80%. There are over 900 military bases. Tough times. The International People's Assembly and its leader, Stephanie Weatherby Brito, also sends us greetings. Stephanie Weatherby Brito's position in the International People's Assembly has helped us understand some of these dynamics. And later this month, there will be a conference in Colombo, Sri Lanka, with the theme Hands Off Asia. Hands Off Asia being, of course, hands off Asia from hyper-imperialism. Hands off those military bases that go from Okinawa to the Chagos Islands, actually to Mayotte off the coast of Africa, all the way around the Indian Ocean. Yeah, hands off Asia. Well, also hands off Africa, hands off Latin America and the Caribbean, hands off the Caribbean, for God's sake, hands off Cuba, so central to our process, hands off Cuba. Indeed, hands off everywhere. Why not, Franziska, hands off Europe? When are the Europeans going to tell, or the Germans going to tell the US dismantle the military bases? There are so many US military bases in Italy and in Germany. Still the occupation after 1945. Where are the Soviet bases? They dismantled their bases, but the US bases are still in existence. Very interesting discrepancy if you look at it in that way. The Soviets didn't maintain full-fledged bases, but the United States did. We're going to take a few questions, but before we do that, I just want to reflect on a few things. Comrade Kwesi raised the question of the class struggle, and I think that's a very important piece of our work, which is assessing the tempo of the class struggle. It's always important to remind ourselves that the capitalist system imposes the class struggle on humanity. It's not when the workers go on strike that the class struggle starts. The workers are joining the class struggle as an organized force when they go on strike. The class struggle is there always. It is what attempts to immiserate, impoverish workers, to make the workers' life filled with indignity and so on. The peasants struggling to survive as they feed the rest of the world. That's already the class struggle. When the peasants go on strike, they join the class struggle as a conscious force of history, as an organized and conscious force. I think it's a very important point that Comrade Kwesi made. And I can see that several people in their questions have asked questions which in one way or the other reflect on that. But there's one question which I believe has come from Nepal, which I'm trying to reflect a little on myself, and I want to ask Comrade Kwesi to come back on it, please. I mean, it's a question, Comrade Kwesi. We don't want to get into the detailed questions, but this one I want us to think about. So many of our comrades are struggling in this period with almost extreme demoralization. A sense of almost futility. wondering, what is the point of me doing all this? Building a trade union, fighting to build platform worker spaces, fighting to build peasant organizations. We just seem to suffer reversal after reversal. And this sense of, is hope, Comrade Kwesi, is hope something we impose on the world, or is it part of the material reality, the historical actuality that we engage with? And I want you to reflect on it, maybe just 5-6 minutes, not a very long reflection, but a message, in a sense, Comrade Kwesi, from Accra, Ghana to the world, to the world's youth, to the Gen Z, comrade. A message of let's say, the principle of hope, please.
Well, if I understand the question correctly, my answer is that hope itself is constructed in the process of struggle. It is the victories that we achieve. It is the hurdles we overcome and so on, which construct hope. Hope is not an illusion. Hope is something which is real and which is the result of the struggles that we are engaged in. In Ghana, our organization is a very small organization compared to many other organizations. We are an organization with a membership of just about 5,000. We're much smaller than that 3 years ago. Okay. But as a result of our struggles, we are able to leverage on the strength of other organizations. The trade union organization, for example, in Ghana is not a socialist organization. But then it has a membership of close to 600,000 people engaged in struggle for wage improvement, for improvement of conditions of work, and so on. By building a collaborative arrangement with the trade unions, we are able to leverage on their strength in specific struggles and so on. Now, even though the trade union organization is not a socialist organization, is not guided by Marxist principles and so on, the ability to leverage on their strength in struggles against privatization and so on gives us hope. It gives us access to the trade unions, and by giving us access to the trade unions, it gives us the possibility, through participation in collective activities and so on, of hope. So hope itself is a construction. Hope itself is a product of the attempt to build the future. The future would come, whether we like it or not, whether we struggle or not, there will be a future. What kind of a future emerges is the result of struggle. What kind of forces are present in that future is a result of building broad fronts, is a result of confronting the different machinations in our society which aim at maintaining the current level of poverty, of misery, of exploitation, and so on. So hope itself must be constructed by the progressive forces led by the socialist forces.
Comrade, it's interesting. I think that's absolutely correct. We build we build the hope that we aspire to, but we also have to tell each other about the hope that is coming from other parts of the world. I highly recommend that comrades go and subscribe to the Pan Africa TV YouTube channel. There is a program in Pan Africa TV called Africa Speaks. Africa Speaks every 2 weeks produces a capsule of progressive and revolutionary struggles on the African continent. Highly recommend subscribing to Pan Africa TV and to circulating widely Africa Speaks. I think it's one of the most accurate shows on the realities on the African continent. There's no substitute for that. I also want to ask people to subscribe to the Tricontinental materials so they come directly to you. We have a project which I hope you'll get involved in, which is to build reading circles in your own areas around the world. Wherever you are, build a reading circle. You might consider a watching circle where you watch Africa Speaks together as a group of people. You meet in somebody's house, watch the program, discuss it, or you meet in somebody's house, read one of the texts, whether from Asia Pan-Africa or Nuestra America or from the Zetkin Forum, from the Arab Maghreb region, read one of our texts, discuss it and chat with each other, build, as they say, the collective life. Ambi, what do we call it? Rescue the collective life. That includes watching parties, reading circles, things like that. If you're interested in any of that, contact Ambi, contact others at our office. We would love to be involved in helping shape these things. You know, it's interesting. People ask, you know, what is politics? Politics isn't always going out on the streets and confronting the state. Politics is also about building state power, of course, but building social power. If we're not building social power, you're not going to be able to maintain state power. You've got to build power in society. For that, we highly recommend things like what I've just suggested, but more, you know, Red Books Day, this, the other. We want you to do lots of things. Tings, there was a question about the Communist Party of China. I don't think we have much time for you to reflect on that. You'd have to give another whole talk on the question of the Communist Party of China. Certainly lots of things happening in China with the Communist Party, now 105 years old. Apparently, according to our News on China release, which Tricontinental produces, you can sign up for News on China. The party is growing by, is this accurate? 1 million people a year? Is that an accurate number? Atul, that's the entire CPIM per year is the growth rate of the Communist Party in China. Ambi, that's quite shocking. I think one has to let people know about that. Also have to wonder, what is the membership criteria in the party if it's letting in 1 million people a year? Is it able to train 1 million people within a year to let them in? Extraordinary. You'll have to read News on China to get those facts, right, Ambi? I think that's what we do, unless Tings has a few things she wants to say. No? All right, let's come back to Comrade Kwesi for some basically closing remarks. What I want to ask you, Comrade, is that, you know, you're right that the future is built by us. We're building socialism now. But it I think might be interesting for people to hear you reflect a little bit about the kinds of possibilities that we keep hearing about, you know, in West Africa, in the Sahel, in that region, you know, from a rooted sense, even if one speaks entirely just from Ghana, in that rooted sense, what should we be looking at in that region or perhaps in the entire continent? What should we be looking at?
Well, some gains are being made in West Africa, significant gains. I would consider the emergence of the Alliance of Sahel States as a substantial gain. Patriotic revolutions are springing up. I mean, recently, there was a survey, official survey in Togo, which suggested that more than 70% of the people of Togo would rather be in the AES than be in the ECOWAS. Now, this is a very significant indicator. But I think we should also be very, very careful not just to jump into these things, you know, without proper appreciation of the situation on the ground. And I speak to you about a place like Burkina Faso. A lot of gains are being made. The government is working purposely to take control of the natural resources of Burkina Faso and so on. But we need to recognize that it doesn't have a mass base. It doesn't. It doesn't have a political movement supporting it as well. Now, that introduces an element of fragility, which we cannot overlook. In these circumstances, the question we ought to be asking is, what is it that we can do in order to consolidate the patriotic gains which are being made in Burkina Faso? Is it by declaring support for what is happening without understanding what is supporting? Is it by analyzing the correlation of forces and where we put our strength and so on? These are important questions that we must be asking constantly. Is what is happening in Burkina Faso the same as what is happening in Mali? No, it is not. Is what is happening in Niger the same as what is happening in Mali. It is not. And I presume that you know what the differences are. Indeed, the Malian government had to get rid of the prime minister because the prime minister in a government that we assumed to be revolutionary was actually an agent of the West who was seriously campaigning for a return to the Bretton Woods institutions for solutions to the problems of Mali and so on. And there was a conflict within the government, and it was resolved by getting rid of the prime minister. Now, many of you were with us when we were in Niger. And of course, I'm sure that all of you paid attention to the speech which was delivered by the prime minister. There was nothing revolutionary about the speech that he gave. You understand? And so on. So these are the contradictions. Now, one of the other problems that we have is that some of the forces in these countries where the patriotic revolutions have broken out have been our allies for many years. They've been revolutionary, they've been socialist and so on. And they have disagreements with the government. How do we manage the situation which enables us to keep our relations with the forces that we have been working with for decades on this project of socialism and still support the unleashing of the patriotic potential in these countries? It's a complex question. There's no easy solution, no easy answer. But these are things that must engage our attention. Just jumping into situations without proper analysis and using methods which we have used in other situations and so on can lead us to complete disaster. And I think that we ought to be cautious, we ought to be calculating, and we ought to put in extra efforts at understanding the domestic situation. And I'd like perhaps to also give you my own example. For more than 10 years, we were compelled to organize underground. Hundreds of my comrades were killed. The hundreds of my comrades who were killed while the progressive forces around the world were hailing Rawlings as a revolutionary. In that same period where progressive forces around the world were hailing Rawlings as a revolutionary, we went to the Bretton Woods institutions, we followed their prescriptions. Ghana became the star people of the IMF and the World Bank. In the process, 500 state enterprises were privatized. 500 state enterprises were built deliberately by the Koumiya government to support its import substitution program, were killed, privatized. 400,000 workers lost their jobs. All the newspapers that we had built over many years, left-wing newspapers, were banned, and so on. And this was happening at the time that the progressive forces in the world were cheering the regime. Why? Because they did not understand our reality. Because nobody paid attention to the concrete things that were happening on the ground. They were listening to slogans by leaders of a coup d'etat. And I think it's important for us to avoid that. The progressive developments that we see need to be supported, but we ought to be deliberate, scientific about what we do in countries where the patriotic revolutions are broken out.
That is something that I think we in South Asia know very well, comrade, because yesterday I was in the home of an Austrian chancellor, former Austrian chancellor, a very progressive person. He had a photograph of Indira Gandhi, signed photograph. I was told that he was a great friend of Jawaharlal Nehru, and so on. And I was just thinking about our comrades who had to go underground from 1975 to 1977. So many of our own families had been disrupted then. Many of us, even as young people, suffered under that. And yet, of course, abroad, Indira Gandhi was seen as a standard bearer of the left, one of the heroes of the new international economic order at the NAM meeting in 1973. We are utterly familiar with that particular conundrum that you've put forward, but it also teaches us about the importance of the Marxist political methodology of having a program having a strategy and having tactics and understanding when and where we seek allies and how we operate regarding different possibilities before us. But it's a very well put statement on your side. It once again affords us the opportunity to think about the centrality of our method of doing politics. One doesn't jump into something enthusiastically, but always looks at what are the programmatic implications, what are the strategic implications, and then indeed what are the tactics. Ambi, I don't want to drag us over and beyond the time. You gave me a very good end time. I think Comrade Kwesi has done immense justice to the text and has taught us a lot here. So happy with our team, Carlos, Laura, Mika, Tings, and Atul. Now you've become Tings and Atul for me. Almost one person, Tings and Atul. Quite literally so, I must say. I don't want to mention what the name of our WhatsApp group is, but I call them Asia's something and something. You won't mention it here. Just imagine Asia's Atul and Tings. But Atul, shall I say it? I call them the Raja and Rani. Those who know it, know it. They are the Raja and Rani of Asia. Anyway, thanks to Ghassane, who is always traveling in a very, very tough region, trying to bring us the most accurate information and maintain contacts with movements that are in extreme difficulty. And I always worry about Ghassane's health and sanity, really, Ghassane. So we send you our love and affection and our gratitude, of course, to Franziska, operating behind enemy lines. Tough work over there in Berlin, Germany. You're holding it down for us, Francesca. Ambi, I'm going to hand it over back to you because I think you should close our meeting.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, panelists, our interpreters, Amilcar, and thank you to the audience and participants. Without this exchange of knowledge, hope will not be rebuilt. And I think this exchange of knowledge is what you can see in the messages, that this gives us hope to reflect on the ideas that each one from different regions are engaging and finding a common praxis for us to replicate elsewhere. Before I end, I have few requests. Comrades, this is our 10th year as Tricontinental Institute, a decade in the battle of ideas. Till now, Vijay and the coordinators have brought us, in spite of all difficulties. If you follow the mainstream media, you know what hurdles we're facing. But now we request that from the 10th year onwards, the community should rally with us, contribute in our publications by reviewing our works, having reading circles, also having volunteers. We need volunteers for video editing, if you for art, for editing, taking writing workshops wherever it is required. So please write to us. I shared our comms email ID in the chat. Please do write to us. And last but not the least, do check out our website. There's a small donate option. If you think you can support our work, if you happen to contribute, do contribute, whatever may be the amount. Thank you once again to our interpreters, all of you who have made it possible, or made this possible. Thank you, Vijay and others. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, comrades.
Bye-bye, comrades. Thank you.
Bye, comrades.
Bye. Bye, Comrade Corazon.
Bye,
See you
Corazon. See you soon.
See you soon. Yeah. Bye, Natalia. Bye, Julia. Bye. See you all
Recording
later.
stopped.
That was great. Thanks, Comrade Kwesi. I'll be in touch very soon.
Okay, waiting for you.
Bye. Thanks, Ambi. Well done, Ambi.